Hi everyone, welcome to video 7 in the pseudocode series. This week we're looking at file handling. There are 3 examples in the pseudocode OCR spec, and we are going to look at those 3 examples, plus we're going to move your thinking forward a little where we look at other possible scenarios that you might be asked to think about. So the 3 examples that we've got to think about are how to read a single line of text, how to read either a sec number or a whole file. The example shows us a whole file, so we'll go through that. And then finally, how do we write to a file? Then, as I've mentioned, the last section is going to look at all the other possibilities that you might face in an exam. So we will begin with reading a single line of text. Now, first of all, we've got to create a connection to our sample text file. In this case, it's called sample.txt. You can assume that wherever we're writing our code is in the same location as sample.txt, and we can just simply create a variable, use the open read instruction to create a connection to sample.txt, which we pass into our function as a parameter. We've then on the next line got a variable. That variable becomes assigned to the contents of myfile.readline. So we can assume that readline is a method that is part of that object. That will just take the top line of information from our text file, and then the final thing that we have to do, and it's always worth a mark, so it's very much worth bearing in mind, is closing that connection to the file. The next section looks at reading multiple or whole files. We need to begin in exactly the same way, so we create our open read connection to our sample.txt file. The thing that's different this time round is looking at how we make sure that we reach the end of the file. So this time we've got a condition controlled loop. We use a while in that case. So we say while we're not at the end of the file, using another method called .endOfFile, then we keep reading each of the lines one at a time. So in this particular example, we would open our connection using the open read instruction. Then while we're not at the end of the file, we would print each line. So in the case of line 1, we would say hello world, line 2, hello internet, line 3, hi sun, line 4, hi moon, and then at that stage we've reached the end of our file, so our condition then changes its state, so we can end the while and we can close our connection once more. Writing to files is very similar. In the program below, we've got to bear in mind though that any contents that are already there will be overwritten. So if we've got hello world, internet, sun and moon from the previous example, when we create our connection to sample.txt, you've got to imagine that we're actually writing over the entire content, so in effect we've got a blank file. We can then use a .writeLine method to write whatever new content we would like, so that will add hello new world as our first line, and at that stage we can then close our connection once more and we can assume that that is going to be saved. So when we look at other possibilities, we've got to remind ourselves about how an array and a list are different. So a list can contain any data type and we don't have to declare a size. An array, we have to declare how many possible locations we can address, and we also have to remember that each data item has got to be of the same type. So an array can be all int or all float or all string, but you can't mix and match in the same way that you can a list. So when you look at the example or whatever you are being asked to complete, you have to bear that in mind. So number 1 looks at how to read multiple lines of text into a list or an array. Number 2 looks at how to read a set number, so count controlled, into a list or an array. Number 3 looks at how to take data that's already in an array or a list and pop that into the text file. And number 4 looks at how to write a specific number of lines from a list or an array into a text file. Number 5, we can then think about adding to a file that already has some content. So if you've probably worked out, we're going to have to do some kind of read. We're going to have to store that information, add any additional information, and then write all of that back to our original file. But I'm going to let you guys work that out. There are 2 questions that I've managed to find so far on writing files or reading files. We've got to create a function, we've got to pass it a file name as a parameter, We've then got to create a connection using OpenRead. We read that first line, both examples only want the first line, and then we pop that information into a string. It doesn't mention closing, but you always get a mark for it, so we stick a close in there and then return the variable that we've put our information into so that we can manipulate it later in our program. So thanks very much for watching. Your next steps may be to revisit arrays and look at the syntax that you need to use there, or you might want to look at the next lesson where we're going to be studying how to write both classes and objects using OCR pseudocode.